most of my multiplier leaders were, demanding. I often think like it lacks compassion to withhold information from people. Like it's almost cruel.
My dear friends, my dear viewers, my dear subscribers, today we have a special guest. It's Miss Liz Wiseman. She is executive advisor, she is researcher, and she is advising executives on topic of leadership. She is the author of three fantastic, or maybe more, but three books which I know personally. And those books are, one of them on the New York bestseller list, and that is Multipliers, how the best leaders make everyone smarter. Even I like even the title, because when I look back at my past, and I thought, well, were there many leaders who made me smarter? Not really. Everybody was pushing me down. Everybody was saying, Gennady, you're rubbish. You have to work harder. That was the message which I was getting. So maybe I would be even something better than I'm now. And then you have another best-selling book on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list, and that is Rookie Smart, Why Learning Beats Knowing in the New Game of Work. Learning Beats Knowing. I love the title. I think that's summarize a lot of things about how process of learning and education should be changed. And another one is the Multiplier effect, tapping the genius inside our schools. And I know that you've done extensive interviews with the school leaders, and then you came up with 5 disciplines which you feel must be taught in order if we want to make our schools really like fabrics of nice, energetic, creative people. You run your CEO of your own Wiseman Group, and you advise top-notch companies. You are based in Silicon Valley. Surprise, surprise, knowing your creativity. And you advised the Google and the Microsoft and Twitter and AT&T and Disney and Facebook. So basically, really one of the companies which shape today's world. Today I talk too much. Today we're going to talk about something which I feel is important. I would like to bring the topic of multiplier. Who are they? And the disruptive people. How they can be, how disruptive can be eliminated or kind of put down, and at the same time, how we can find multipliers in our teams and among our leaders. So what is the multiplier?
So a multiplier is a leader who brings out the best in everyone, who people are at their full intellect and capability around. They're leaders who use their own intelligence in a way that amplifies the intelligence of people around them. And, my hope is that everyone has had an experience working for one of these leaders, someone you did your very best work for. Like you were smart and you solved hard problems and you're making progress. That is a multiplier leader. And they get access to virtually all of the know-how and creativity and intelligence and talent of people who work for them. And I contrast this with a different kind of leader I had observed and then went and studied, which was a diminishing leader. And these were leaders who were often really smart, capable people themselves, but other people around them weren't at their best. Like somehow for these leaders to be at their best, everyone else had to be cautious and hold back and play it safe. Like they weren't necessarily at their worst around these leaders, but they operated at a fraction of their true capability. And I found that these diminishing leaders got less than half of people's know-how and intelligence, but yet, of course, they're paying people full market price for their work, but they're not utilizing people. And I found that there was this 2x difference between how much capability the multiplier leader got and the diminishing leader got. And And maybe one other thing to kind of start our conversation is I found that most of the diminishing that's happening, most of it is coming from what I call the accidental diminisher, not
Intentional, sort of,
yeah, not the intentional diminisher, not the person who has to be the smartest one in the room and really loves bossing people around, and not the bully, not the narcissist, but the well-intended leader who's trying to do a good job leading and bringing out the best in his team, or really values the people that she leads, but is still having a diminishing impact. And that's what I found most fascinating.
Right. Can you give me an example? For example, multiplier. Multiplier, as I understand it, that somebody is good and wants to multiply his or her abilities. So it's like Keynesian multiplier in economics. So you start something and then it grows and grows and evolves, etc., and gets bigger and better because of that initial impulse, right, coming from the leader. Is it the right understanding of multiplier?
Yeah, absolutely. Is that people are at their best around these people. They multiply the capability of people around them. So they start this cycle of growth essentially, and they're leaders who lead high growth companies, but they're also leaders who understand that there's latent intelligence inside the organization. Maybe the best way to explain it is, you mentioned that I do some work at Apple. So when I was writing the book, I was doing a lot of coaching work and some advising work at Apple. And, you know, Tim Cook is very much a multiplier leader. And you look at what he has done to Apple and the kind of the multiplying of the value. And everyone thought that nobody could come in after Steve Jobs. When the day Tim was announced, it was funny. I had been giving a lecture somewhere and I'd been talking about Tim. And I'm like, he is the kind of leader who can do this, because he doesn't assume he has all the answers for the company, that his job is to frame the issues, ask the questions, and extract all that capability from people around him. When Tim, before he was CEO, he was the chief operating officer at Apple and ran all the supply chain and operational side. When he was running sales, he came into one of his the budget meetings, the planning meetings, and people were expecting their revenue target. Okay, you know, you're going to grow 20% year over year. It's probably like 20 to 30% year over year. And, you know, you can go ahead and add 15% to your cost. And that will still give like a profit improvement. That's the logic that Apple and lots of companies had been running under. It's a logic of addition. But Tim came into this budget meeting and he said, here's your growth target. And it was double-digit growth, probably in that 20 to 30% year over year. Every one of the sales leaders on his team, they were running billion-dollar plus businesses. And he said, but this year, I think we can achieve that growth without any additional headcount, which was shocking and unnerving to a team because they had always been adding heads. That's how they got more revenue. And one of them even said, you know, Tim, like, kind of, excuse me, but perhaps you don't understand how sales works. Like, everybody knows there's a formula and we have spreadsheets and we plug in our top line revenue growth and it'll tell us exactly how many sales heads we need and administrative staff and sales engineers that we need to get that number. And this one executive started to argue with Tim about this. And it was interesting. I spoke with Tim after that meeting. I was not in that meeting. I was talking with Tim after it, and he's relaying this to me. And what Tim said is, I'm not sure that that sales leader understands our strategy. See, because Tim was thinking in the logic of multiplication. He knew that there was underutilized resources inside an organization. Even when people are working really hard, most people are intellectually underutilized. Like, they're coming into work knowing they have more insight and capability than is being used. And Tim's logic was, if we can, let's get more from the people who already work here rather than hiring more people. And it's not like we're going to ask people to work harder or longer hours. It's we're going to more deeply utilize talent inside this company.
Sort of work smarter than harder, right?
Yeah, and it was two very different types of logic. One is the logic of addition, more growth equals more resources, and one is the logic of multiplication. How do I better utilize the talent I have? Which interestingly creates a pretty great work experience, because most people actually don't like working for bosses who underutilize their talent. And we love working for people who use us at our very best.
Absolutely, absolutely. I just recall my experience as well. I have a boss in IMC Consulting Limited, John Bacharach. He's retired already, so I can say that. And he was always, but I mean, he was multiplier, but he was in a strange way. He was always like, yeah, it's okay, but not good enough. So you can do better. You can do better. And it's like, you can do better. Like, damn. And really looking back, and I was getting better and better and better. But not through a kind of nice talk, but it was kind of a little bit tough management. But now looking back, he was definitely not diminisher. He was a multiplier, because I was so proud of that I could do better. And I remember once he tapped on my shoulder and said, "You did well." And for me, that was the best prize ever.
Yeah, it means a lot. And you know what you've just captured there, Gennady, was very much what we saw, is that some of these multiplier leaders were what I would call like big-hearted, warm leaders. Like maybe the kind who would put their arm around you and tell you you were doing a good job and that you were important to the team, that you mattered. But a lot of these leaders were hard-edged leaders. And they, as my publisher said, she read the first version of the manuscript, and one of the things she wrote back to me was, she's like, wow, these aren't what she called cupcakes and kisses kinds of leaders. These are hard edge. They're demanding leaders. They expect a lot of people. They have high standards. They give people challenges. They ask people to do hard things. They're leaders who are comfortable allowing other people to be a little uncomfortable. And they hold people accountable. And, you know, it's funny. It's really been 10 years since I first wrote this book. And, you know, the book seems to be more relevant now than ever. But it took me a couple years after I had written it to really see what was going on. And I wrote about, okay, here's what these multiplier leaders do. They do this and that. But in essence, what they do is they create two simultaneous conditions. One is safety, one is stretch. So they're creating a safe environment for people to disagree, to debate, to experiment, take risks. So they're building trust and safety in the environment. And I don't mean like hard hat safety, but psychological safety, intellectual safety. And then they don't just leave it at that. It's not a feel-good environment. It's okay, now that you are comfortable, I'm going to ask you to be a little uncomfortable. I'm going to ask you to do hard things. I'm going to have high expectations of you. You know, most of my multiplier leaders were, you know, demanding, bordering on tough leaders who I would do anything ethical and moral to live up to their expectations of me. And when they said, you know, good job, it meant a lot.
Exactly. But it's another thing which I think can distinguish an ordinary people like myself and true leaders is that they can give you feedback, and tough feedback. So, for example, I'm very good at complimenting people, making people comfortable. I'm not very good at making people uncomfortable. And that's why when I had the chance to run big companies, well, big, like 70 employees, I was failing very often because I couldn't force myself to make people uncomfortable. You know what I mean? I was not, how can I say, something was missing in my leadership qualities, that yes, I could make people work, but not in systematically stretching them. And at the same time, in a nice way.
Yeah, well, there's, I think, a way to reframe that. And I think the multiplier perspective on that is that giving people feedback is not a judgment on them. It's not something to make them uncomfortable or comfortable. It's not praise or criticism.
Mm-hmm.
Giving someone feedback is giving them vital information
Right.
that they need. And, you mentioned like the subtitle of the book, how the best leaders make everyone smarter. Well, for us to be smarter, more capable, like we need information. It's the raw ingredient of intelligent decisions and intelligent actions. And so when we withhold feedback from people, we're not giving them the information that they need to
Right.
succeed.
Right.
And so, I think of it more like how a thermostat works, that, on the wall that regulates the heat inside a building. It's, it's taking in the temperature. Oh, it's too cold in here. We need to, turn up the heater. It's giving that feedback to itself saying, you need more heat. You're too cold right now. The room is too cold. It's not casting judgment. It's not like feeling bad about that. It's just saying, you need more heat versus, oh no, it's too hot. We need to turn down the heat. And it's just information to help people know if they're on track and how to get back on track and how to calibrate that. And I often think like it lacks compassion to withhold information from people.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's almost cruel to deny people the information they need to be successful. And so I think when I interpret feedback this way, it helps me to give people like honest performance feedback.
It's absolutely great. And I wish I could have you as my tutor in my leadership. I think I would be better. But that's really one thing, because I think in our society in general, there is, and it's not kind of my observation only, there are a lot of people writing about it, that there are too much of praising people, too much of, even with the kids. I mean, you praise your child no matter what. And on one hand, yes, it's good, but on the other hand, it's not good, because the child doesn't know his or her, true abilities. It's always good, it's always wonderful. And then when the child grows up and comes to real world, where without parents and around, and then he gets a feedback, and that's a shock. And in fact, one of my books which I'm planning to write is about childhood, about sort of parenting, how to bring children, because it's so important to me now. But do you know what I mean?
I think there's I had an epiphany on this recently, and I realized that the reason why so many times people have a hard time giving feedback and also have a hard time receiving feedback is we assume it's feedback and information about us.
Right.
You're telling me if I did a good job or if I did a bad job. And it's a lot easier to receive feedback when people aren't giving me feedback on me, they're giving me feedback on my work.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so when we separate out, we say feedback is just information on performance. And it's not about the performance of the person, it's how fit that work is for the job that work was supposed to do. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's because I'm a multi-time author that I've had to learn to do this. In fact, I've had my own experiences where, like, I once had one of my hero authors give me feedback about something I had written while I was there in the room. He had invited me to, this is Carrie Patterson, who wrote Crucial Conversations, and I had worked for him, and I had sent him a draft of something, and he's like, he reads it and he calls me up instantly, and he's like, Liz, or actually what he said, he's like, girl, have you done your homework? And girl, can you write? So he's like a hero author friend of mine, former boss, and he says, "Girl, can you write?" I'm like, "Oh, Carrie loves my work. He thinks I'm a great writer." He says, "Come to my office and we'll sit down and we'll spend a couple hours going through it." So I expected him to, give me some little bits of improvement and suggestions, but I felt it was going to be a feel-good session because, like, "Girl, can you write?" And I flew 2 states over and met with him, and it was the most grueling, brutal experience maybe I've ever had getting feedback, because he's like ripping it apart, reading it out loud. "Oh, that's terrible. That's not even true. How could you say that? Like, that doesn't make sense." And it was almost 2 hours of this. And and honestly, when we get done, like, he finishes and he looks up at me, kind of wanting some validation that what he had just done was helpful. And I said, "Carrie, like, that was brutal. It was brutal." I said, "The only thing that would have made that worse is if I was, like, standing on the table naked while you did that. Now that would have made that even worse, because I felt so, like, exposed."
Exposed, right?
And then, like, it helped me and he said, he goes, "Liz," he goes, "I think your work is like amazing." He goes, "Yes, this is like my most brutal feedback." And he says, "I'm giving it to you because I think your work is great and it deserves it. And I think you can handle this." And it really helped me reorient myself. I'm like, "Oh, he's not talking about me. He's giving me feedback on my work. I need to have an out of body experience where I can take myself out of that and look and just let him beat up on my work." And it really helped me separate those two. And, if you are, if anyone listening is having trouble giving feedback to people, give people feedback on their work, not them. Like, what, let me give you some comments on what I see in the document, or this is what I thought of the presentation, as opposed to, "Here's what you did." And if you're having trouble receiving feedback, really separate those. It's not feedback about you. You are independent of your work. It's feedback on what you wrote, the code you wrote, the presentation you gave, the approach to that problem.
It's interesting because in my culture, the Russian-speaking people and Eastern European culture, it's so hard to separate your work and yourself. And I never forget, I was for a couple of years, I was member of American Economic Association. And I remember I've written a paper on, I think, privatization or something. And people were, "Gennady, oh, how interesting, you're a great guy." And then I delivered the paper and they, were so sort of nasty to me. And they were saying that this is weak, this is not right, requires more data, this is this. And I was like, oh, I thought, well, what I'm doing here, because it's like they're completely making me small. And then when my session was over, they came to me, "Gennady, let's go for a drink." And I thought, well, but you hate me. I said, no, 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 you're a great guy. But what you've written requires some more thinking. And for me, that was a really good lesson. But I still couldn't, even I remember their faces, I still remember these people. And I still, I think, didn't overcome completely to what they were saying, because I took it personally. And my subconscious really cannot get out of it. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's great.
Separating our identity. And I mean, I very much identify with my work. And for me, my work is a passion, it's a calling, and I love doing my work. And I do feel like it's an extension of me, but it is not me. Like, I'm capable of doing bad work and remaining a good person.
Hmm.
I'm capable of producing something that has maybe some faulty thinking and still being a good thinker.
Right.
And I think we occasionally see the opposite happen. Like, sometimes the brilliant work comes from some maybe
Absolutely. I don't want to use the word.
questionable people. And I think the more that we can separate the two, the more it allows us to take in feedback and improve our work and still maintain our sense of identity and worth and value.
I think that's really excellent lesson for all our viewers and myself including. But how you can grow up this separation, how you can teach people be this kind of multiplier, what do they have to do? I mean, do they need formal training? Do they need some, how all some people are born, there's a question of whether you're born leaders or leaders are made, etc. So what do you think, multipliers, are they born, or you really can, you and your works and the people like you can help people become multipliers?
Well, I think leadership style and the way we lead is very much like an athletic talent, that there are some people who probably have some natural genetic advantage. And then there are people who are born into circumstances that give them an advantage. Like if I was raised by my mother and father and taught to be honest and be direct, I'm probably going to be better at giving feedback. If I was given challenges, but it was, safe for me to make mistakes, I'm going to be better at doing that as a leader. Your first boss in the workplace probably has a lot to influence that. Very much like an athlete. If you happen to be a runner born in Jamaica, where there's all of these development facilities, for runners, like you might have some natural talent and you might also have the advantage of being around another great runner, but then everything from there is conditioning. And it's very much the same with leadership. If you happen to have been in an environment where you were taught a lot of these principles well when you were young and in school and had the right role models, you're advantaged. But I have seen so many people who don't come from those advantages learn to be great leaders and multiplier leaders. It just means you're going to have to work a little bit harder. And like so many of these things, it's not about learning a set of skills. Mm-hmm. Like, in the book, I list a bunch of skills. I teach and coach leaders on a bunch of techniques and practices and things you can do. Like,
it's not manipulation. It's deeper than that, right? So it's not just.
It's not what you do. Like I have some techniques that I teach and share, like in the book, on things you can do. Like, if you tend to be an over contributor, you could take what I call the poker chip challenge, which is to go into a meeting and say, okay, I've got 4 chips in my hand. Each one represents something I say. I'm only going to say 4 things in this meeting, and I'm going to use the rest of the meeting to ask questions and let other people chime in. That's a technique, a practice, but it's in how you think. Because the behavior of diminishers flows from an assumption that most seem to have, that people aren't going to figure things out without them. Mm-hmm. And when I assume that as a business leader, or when I assume that as a parent, you've got 5 children, and I know parenting and leadership in your home is very important to you. When you assume that people aren't capable of figuring it out without you, you end up down this diminishing path. And you can end up very easily becoming an accidental diminisher, rescuing people who really should struggle and work it out themselves, or jumping in to solve problems without giving other people a chance to jump in. And so it's changing that assumption to a multiplier assumption, which is that people are smart and they're going to figure it out. And so, if we want to build these capabilities, we can learn a set of techniques and practices and skills. But if we want to really change the way we lead or develop an approach to leading for life, it's about inculcating a set of beliefs and assumptions. Do you believe that everyone brings genius and brilliance to a team? Or do you believe that there's only a few smart people? Do you believe that it's the leader's job to have the answers? Or do you believe it's a leader's job to ask questions and get everyone else thinking? So it's like change your belief and you change your behavior.
Right. It's easy to say, of course, but so hard to do. It's like a lot of things in life. But yes, you change people's thinking, and then you still create the conditions where, you know, thinking can be changed. So you create, I mean, you stretch people, sort of, you give them tasks which seems to be impossible, like with Tim Cook, you know, like without extra sales force, you achieve the same targets. So you stretch them.
Yeah, but what you said there is so, so important. I just want to put an exclamation point by it. You said you change people's thinking, but you create conditions in which people's thinking can be changed.
Mhm.
That's really the job of a leader or an educator, is how do I create conditions where new beliefs can be developed? Which, you know, right now we're leading in a time of COVID and so much uncertainty and instability in many ways. And we need a refresh of thinking. And as a leader, you know, you either create a model where the leader has the answers and we rely on what the leader tells or what we've always done, or you create a condition where people can challenge that and say, you know what, there's some things that were true about our business that are no longer true. And let's evolve our thinking.
Right. And in fact, when reading the autobiographies of great leaders, in fact, more and more, you mentioned Tim Cook, and I think even you know, Bezos. You know, I've read Steve Anderson's book. You know, this Bezos letters, and it's really kind of it's everywhere. It's everywhere. So a lot of leaders understand that as a really important thing. But as I said, I mean, understanding is just maybe a small step forward. It's important, but it's far from really achieving the desired behavior. So it's, oh gosh, it's really, may I ask you, I mean, have you, let's say, you talk to a lot of people, a lot of leaders. Can you give me some, maybe not statistics really, but your perception, really, how many people really can or could take it on board and change? Because I just recently saw statistics on personal development. There is so much effort put into personal development, and at the same time, you know, real people who changed with all these masses of lectures and books are very, very small, according to some. You know.
Yeah, I mean, we could cite all the reasons why people can change and do change, but it is interesting to look at what are the reasons why people can't change. Let me cite one that we don't often talk about.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we talk about how we get lazy, change lazy, like we aspire to something. People might read Multipliers and say, man, I really want to lead this way. I don't want to be a diminisher. I want to be a multiplier. But then we get lazy and habits take over and such. But one of the things that I find is more interesting is when other people don't allow us to change. So I've seen a number of people who've had strong diminishing tendencies as leaders who really deeply down want to change, and they've done the work of change.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I got a letter to our website. It was right after the Multipliers book had come out, and it was so interesting. It said, accidental diminisher seeking reform and recovery, or something like this. Accidental diminisher thinking like reformation. And that's it, and gave his name and his number. And so I had to call him. And he said, you know, all my role models have been diminishing. It's the only thing I've ever known. I've grown my business with like this way of leading. And he said, I'm about 50 years old, and I've got maybe 12 years left doing what I'm doing. And I want to go out as a multiplier, not a diminisher. And I'd like to build a lot of other multiplier leaders in that process. Can you help me? Great. So we help. He does the hard work, and that's a story I can tell you. But here's one of the problems he encountered is he had such a diminishing impact on people that despite his intentions and his efforts to change, people had a really hard time seeing him differently.
Interesting. So it's like diminishing multiplier.
Yes, like people were pulling him back into, no, this is the box that we have you in. You're this way. And they didn't want to let him be a different way. And he had to go and leave that organization and go to another.
Oh.
I mean, he made some progress in that organization, but not the way he should have based on the work he had done. And he went and had to start new somewhere where people perceived him as this kind of a leader, and he was able to. So, you know, it's one of the dynamics we don't often talk about is, and I think part of it is because this diminishing dynamic hurts people.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've worked for a diminisher, you probably hold a fair bit of resentment.
Right.
And sometimes you'll let them grow and evolve. And sometimes you're like, no, you're going to forever be the bad guy in my movie. And so that's, you know, that's one of the reasons. And we have to think about that. Sometimes, you know, people don't have to leave a company, but they might have to transfer groups, or they might have to do some more work to, I call it PR your change, you know, be more explicit with, hey, here's what I've been doing. Here's what I'm trying to do. Here are the changes I'm making, and like really guide people through that evolution of yourself as a leader so that they're more willing to accept you in that role.
Very, very interesting. So it's better to start it right from the very beginning.
Oh,
better to be.
Yes, amen to that, as we often say. And you know, I always prioritize on my schedule anything that involves teaching leadership and ideas to people in college. And even there's a conference I teach at Stanford every year where high school students come in from around the world. And I go in and teach this idea of leader as multiplier. And these high school students get it. And, you know, this conference has been running for a while, and it's always the most popular session. And, you know, I turn down like business engagements to go do this volunteer work because I see the difference it's making in young people in high school. And that's where I think we should be investing in teaching people new ways to lead before they've built a lot of bad habits.
Could it be that, let's say, brick factory or Tesla facilities, they require different type of leadership? I mean, I'm going on the thin ice. For example, when there are creativity is required, when you want to multiply on the people's potential, creative potential, when people feel at ease by contradicting you, it's one environment, and that requires that environment of high tech, you know, software, etc. And if you take, let's say, brick factory, when you cannot challenge much. I mean,
a brick factory, is that what you said?
Brick factory or whatever, you know, factory which is like you do it, you know, like your father did, and you know, the only thing you change machinery maybe. Then in this case, to be, you know, this multiplier, or maybe it's wrong what I'm saying. I think multiplier should be there and here, I think.
Well, I'll tell you what I found surprised me. And, you know, I grew up in Silicon Valley. I spent the early part of my career working for Oracle, the software company. Mm-hmm. And honestly, when I wrote the book, I was writing it for Silicon Valley. I was writing it for companies that competed on intellectual property and companies that were, you know, and all intellectual property fields. So like Silicon Valley, biotech, education, businesses that their product is intelligence and ideas. And I was surprised when the ideas started resonated in other industries. And it wasn't that I didn't think those industries deserved the ideas or could benefit and profit from those. I just wasn't thinking about those industries. And I got taught by those industries that the ideas are as relevant on the shop floor as they are, you know, in the laboratory. And I've watched those industries take those ideas and use them to empower the brick builder.
Right.
So, you know, I've been schooled.
Yes, and especially
I've
now,
been taught.
I mean, the industries are moving towards this creative I mean, the rest will be done by artificial intelligence, you know, like robot or something like. So more and more businesses would be requiring, you know, your people's enthusiasm and innovation and desire to make things better than they were, you know,
And
yesterday.
particularly for any industry that is highly influenced by or dependent on technology, then you very much need this kind of leadership. Now, there are some where, you know, we don't change much. This is how we've always done it. And maybe you don't need it there, but just because like, this is how my father did it, therefore this is how I'm supposed to do it, doesn't mean that that son or daughter wants to continue doing that. And I think more and more we're seeing young people say, no, I need to do it differently. Yeah. And I think we as the incumbent leaders need to be prepared for that. You don't want to be caught off guard, not able to keep that young talent inside your organization.
Right. And especially now coming back to schools, it must start, of course, with the parents who will be teaching that. And then with the school teachers, you know, school leaders who will be teaching, you know, students to challenge them, to be more open, not to be afraid, and at the same time be, you know, obviously obedient and being what, you know, school children should do. But so this is a kind of should start at the early stages as possible in order to enter the working life already prepared for all the things which we discussed. Liz, thank you so much. I know that you're writing your next bestseller. I'm sure it's going to be a bestseller.
Well, I'm not sure about that. So I'm writing another book and we'll see if it's useful to anyone.
Well, I mean, usually our prediction is based on our past experience. And, you know, our past experience with your books is going to be another really, really useful book for everybody who is in the business or in parenting or in school. So I'm sure it's going to be another bestseller. So thank you very much, Liz. Thank you very much for your time. And I will put down your you know, books and I would encourage people to read them.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your insights, your questions. And I just love this insight you brought. There are so many, but in particular, this idea of like, we need to create an environment where new thinking can emerge. I think that says it all.
Thank you so much. I feel now praised and I feel good about myself.
Well, I'll say your work was good.
Yeah.
And you are a wonderfully nice person. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Liz. Take care. Okay. I will write to you and I will tell you when the interview is out. Bye-bye.